On a warm July evening, inside a small studio in Los Angeles, the last surviving Beatle looked down at the floor and tried to speak. Cameras were rolling, the lights were soft, and Ringo Starr, 85 years old, thin, gentle, and carrying more history than any man alive, opened his mouth, but no words came out. His hands trembled slightly. His throat tightened. And then, in front of the quiet room, Ringo began to cry. It wasn't the cry of a celebrity overwhelmed by praise. It wasn't the cry of a man looking back at fame or fortune. It was something deeper, an eruption from a life scarred by illness, abandonment, violence, unimaginable pressure, and the loss of every man he once considered a brother. This is the story behind that moment, and the life that led him there. Before he was a drummer, before he was a Beatle, before millions screamed his name, Ringo Starr was just Richard Starkey, a sickly boy growing up in the bomb-shattered streets of Liverpool. Born in 1940, he entered the world in the middle of a world war. German bombs fell close enough to shake the foundations of his childhood home. His father didn't stay. Ringo was barely 3 when he walked out, leaving his mother Elsie to raise him alone in a city covered in rubble. Poverty was a daily routine, but what truly marked his childhood was illness. At age 6, an appendix rupture nearly killed him. He spent months in a hospital bed, drifting in and out of consciousness. Doctors told his mother he might never fully recover. And just as he started to heal, tuberculosis struck. He spent nearly 2 years isolated in a sanatorium, watching other sick children disappear from their beds. To keep the children from slipping into despair, nurses gave them simple percussion instruments. That was the first time Richard Starkey tapped a rhythm, the moment destiny nudged him forward. He returned home a teenager, thin, behind in school, and often alone. His classmates mocked him for being older than them. Teachers assumed he wouldn't amount to much. His mother remarried a kind man named Harry Graves, who introduced him to big band music and Earl Palmer-style drumming. The moment Ringo heard the rumble of a real drum kit, everything changed. He worked odd jobs, took factory shifts, saved spare coins for drum parts, and practiced until his hands blistered. He joined local skiffle groups, then the biggest craze sweeping Liverpool's teenagers, and slowly built a reputation. He wasn't the flashiest and he wasn't the fastest, but he had feel, an instinctive musical sense that pulled people in. By the late 1950s, everyone in Liverpool's music scene knew his name, Ringo Starr. By 1960, Ringo joined Rory Storm and the Hurricanes, one of Liverpool's top bands. They performed in the brutal nightlife of Hamburg, Germany, a place where drummers played 7 hours a night and slept on concrete floors. Hamburg was loud, violent, sleepless, and chaotic, but it was there Ringo's timing, stamina, and personality became legendary. He crossed paths with a rough, loud, energetic band named the Beatles. There was something special about their chemistry, especially their humor. Paul was charming, John was rebellious, George was quiet but sharp, and together they formed a magnetic force. They weren't friends yet, but they noticed him. Ringo noticed them too. Hamburg forged all of them. But it would take 2 more years before their lives merged forever. By 1962, the Beatles were rising, but Pete Best, their drummer, wasn't meshing in the studio. Producer George Martin quietly pushed for a replacement. John, Paul, and George knew the drummer they wanted. They called Ringo. It was a brutal moment in rock history, Pete Best fired suddenly, fans outraged, and Ringo stepping into the most intense spotlight imaginable. Crowds chanted, "Pete forever. Ringo never." People spat at him. Girls screamed at him in the streets. Some fans even sent him threats. But the boys supported him. Well, most of the time. During early sessions, producer George Martin wasn't confident yet. On the recording of Love Me Do, he replaced Ringo with a session drummer, Andy White. Ringo was forced to sit in a corner shaking a tambourine, humiliated. He later said it was the worst moment of his early Beatles life. But when Beatlemania exploded, Ringo's charm became essential. Fans adored him. His humor, his grin, his humility, he grounded the band. He made them feel human. Little did anyone know the emotional storms he was hiding. From 1963 to 1966, Ringo experienced the most intense global hysteria any human being has ever faced. Airports screamed. Hotels shook. Fans fainted at the sight of the band. Every second of his life was controlled by handlers, managers, security guards, and the relentless schedule set by Brian Epstein. Ringo never complained, but it consumed him. He was hospitalized for tonsillitis during a world tour. He thought he was losing his place. And when the Beatles replaced him temporarily with Jimmy Nicol, those fears deepened. Ringo returned to find thousands of photographs of Nicol sitting in his seat, signing autographs, waving from balconies. He later admitted, "I thought they didn't need me anymore." The insecurity would follow him the rest of his life. Fame wasn't glamorous behind the scenes, inside studio walls, pressure cracked friendships. John battled addictions, Paul and George often fought about direction, tension thickened, and during the White Album sessions, Ringo reached a breaking point. Feeling criticized, unappreciated, and exhausted, he simply stood up and walked out. He left a note on the drum stool, "I feel unloved. I'm leaving." He fled to Italy. When he returned weeks later, the band had decorated his drum kit with flowers, an apology. But the bond between the four was never the same. By 1969, with marriages strained, business arguments boiling, and the band fracturing, Ringo watched in agony as the greatest musical partnership in history collapsed. That if this kind of story touches your heart, if you're someone who cares about truth, responsibility, and speaking up for the voiceless, please like this video, subscribe to our channel and share it with someone who should hear it. Let's get started. When the Beatles broke up, Ringo spiraled. The public blamed Paul blamed management, John blamed everyone, and Ringo blamed himself. He drank heavily. He felt worthless without the group. He later admitted entire months vanished from his memory. His first marriage crumbled. His children watched from behind closed doors as the man who charmed millions punched walls and drowned himself in alcohol. At his worst, he once said, "I could drink a room dry. I drank to die." But he didn't die. He chose recovery. In the early 1980s, after a terrifying blackout episode, Ringo and Barbara Bach entered rehab together. The program saved their lives and their marriage. When they emerged sober, Ringo rebuilt his career from scratch. He formed the All-Star Band, a rotating supergroup of legendary musicians. For decades he toured the world, refusing to slow down, living proof that survival was its own form of success. He lost John to murder in 1980. That he lost George to cancer in 2001. By 2025, he stood as the final Beatle still alive. That knowledge weighed heavily on him. Even in his 80s, Ringo released albums, toured globally, and became a symbol of peace, sobriety, and gratitude. But as he aged, memories he had buried began to surface: childhood loneliness, the band's cruelty, the fear of replacement, the losses of his friends. During the quiet studio session in 2025, he was asked, "What does it feel like to be the last Beatle?" The question struck deeper than anyone expected. He whispered, "Lonely." And then the tears came, tears for the boys he grew up with, the world they changed, and the private pain no amount of fame could erase. Because they weren't about celebrity, they weren't about nostalgia, they were about survival, about a man who lost his father, his childhood, his health, his friends, his band, and nearly his life to addiction, yet somehow kept going. At 85 years old, he cried not out of weakness, but out of the deep truth that after everything, he is still here. Still drumming, still smiling, still spreading peace, still carrying the legacy of 4 boys who changed the world. And maybe, finally, allowing himself to feel the weight of it. That if this kind of story touches your heart, if you're someone who cares about truth, responsibility, and speaking up for the voiceless, please like this video, subscribe to our channel and share it with someone who should hear it. Let's get started.